The champagne glass slipped from Vivian's trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The woman standing in the doorway wore winter white Chanel and a diamond ring identical to the one on Vivian's own hand. Margot's voice cut through the silence like a blade wrapped in silk. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your little pretend wife, Dominic?" Vivian's heart stopped. Pretend wife? Oh, sweetheart. Margot stepped into the penthouse suite with the confidence of someone who owned not just this room but the very ground beneath it. "You didn't actually think that ring was real, did you? You didn't think the marriage certificate he showed you was legitimate?" Dominic's face had gone pale. "Margot, please, let me explain." "Explain what exactly?" "That you've been married to me for 18 years? That our 3 children think their father is on business trips when he's actually playing house with his mistress?" Vivian felt the room spin around her. Mistress? 3 children? 18 years? She looked at the man she had loved for 3 years. The man who had promised her forever. The man who had slipped a diamond ring on her finger and called her his wife. And she realized she had never known him at all. Have you ever had a moment where everything you believed turned out to be a lie? Where the person you trusted most became a complete stranger in the blink of an eye? Where your entire identity crumbled because it was built on someone else's deception? This is the story of a woman who discovered her fairy tale was actually someone else's nightmare. A woman who learned that the life she was living belonged to another woman entirely. A woman who lost absolutely everything in a single afternoon. But what she didn't know, what no one in that room could have predicted, was that this moment of complete destruction would become the foundation of the greatest success she would ever achieve. Stay with me to discover how one woman's worst day became the first day of her extraordinary new life. How she transformed from a victim into a victor. And how she would eventually become the one person standing between Dominic and his next victim. If you believe that rock bottom can become a foundation, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing, subscribe to this channel right now and join me on this incredible journey. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever had your reality completely shattered? I read every single one of your responses. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the moment when everything seemed perfect. Back to the champagne toast that would change Vivian's life forever. The penthouse suite at the Royal Meridian overlooked all of Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living painting. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light and scattered it into rainbows across pristine white walls. Fresh roses perfumed the air with the promise of romance. Everything about this moment was supposed to be perfect. Vivian Moreau sat across from her husband at a table set for 2, watching him pour champagne that cost more than her entire wardrobe from before they met. At 31, she had transformed from a struggling MBA graduate into the wife of one of the most successful men on the Eastern Seaboard. Her designer dress fit like it was made for her, because it was. Her jewelry sparkled with the kind of understated elegance that whispered old money. 3 years. She still couldn't quite believe it sometimes. To us. Dominic raised his crystal flute with that devastating smile that still made her heart flutter. At 45, he carried the distinguished air of wealth and breeding. Silver threads wove through his dark hair. Confidence radiated from every perfectly tailored inch of his custom suit. To us. Vivian clinked her glass against his, watching the bubbles rise like tiny celebrations. She was about to take her first sip when the suite doors burst open. Vivian's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. A woman stood in the doorway, tall and elegant, wrapped in a winter white Chanel coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Behind her stood 2 uniformed police officers and a man carrying a leather briefcase. But it wasn't the entourage that made Vivian's blood turn to ice. It was the massive diamond ring on the woman's left hand. The exact same ring she was currently wearing. The same platinum band. The same cushion-cut diamond. The same distinctive setting with smaller diamonds cascading down the sides. Dominic. The woman's voice was ice and silk combined. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your little pretend wife? Vivian's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Pretend wife? What did that mean? She was Dominic's wife. She had the ring. She had the marriage certificate. She had 3 years of memories. Margot, please. Dominic set down his champagne with careful precision, but Vivian could see his hand trembling slightly. This isn't what it looks like. Really? The woman, Margot, strode into the suite with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Because it looks exactly like what my investigators have been documenting for the past 6 months. My husband playing house with another woman while his children wonder why daddy is always traveling for business. Vivian found her voice, though it came out barely louder than a whisper. Husband? Children? Oh, sweetheart. Margot turned to face her fully, and Vivian was struck by the cold perfection of her features. Beautiful in a porcelain doll way, with the kind of ageless elegance that money could buy. You didn't actually think that ring was real, did you? You didn't think the marriage certificate he showed you was legitimate? I don't understand. Vivian looked between Margot and Dominic, searching for something that made sense. We're married. We had a ceremony. There were witnesses. The man with the briefcase stepped forward. He had the look of someone who delivered bad news professionally. Mrs. Caldwell, the legal Mrs. Caldwell, hired our firm 6 months ago when irregularities appeared in her husband's financial records. He opened his briefcase and produced a folder thick with papers. A second apartment in Tribeca. Credit card bills for jewelry purchased on dates that didn't correspond with any anniversaries in their marriage. Hotel reservations under assumed names. Vivian's hand went instinctively to her ring. The ring Dominic had placed on her finger while promising to love her forever. I'm afraid there's more. The attorney's voice was clinical, detached. Mr. Caldwell never filed any marriage paperwork for your ceremony. The officiant was an actor. The witnesses were paid participants. Legally, you are not his wife. You never were. The champagne glass slipped from Vivian's nerveless fingers. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling end over end before shattering against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the suite like a gunshot. 3 years. Her voice cracked on the words. 3 years of my life. 3 years of my husband's money. Margot's tone carried no sympathy. The apartment he put you in, the cars, the credit cards, all of it was funded by our marital assets. Assets I intend to recover. Dominic finally seemed to find his voice. Margot, I'll fix this. We can work something out. The only thing you'll be working out is a divorce settlement and a criminal investigation for fraud. Margot didn't even look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on Vivian with an expression that was impossible to read. I've already spoken with the district attorney's office. What you've done isn't just adultery, Dominic. It's financial fraud, identity manipulation, and depending on how the prosecutor feels, potentially bigamy, since you certainly let this woman believe she was your legal spouse. Vivian stared at the man she had loved. Still loved, somewhere beneath the ice spreading through her veins. His distinguished gray hair. His kind eyes. Eyes that were now darting between his real wife and his fake one, calculating, always calculating. She had fallen in love with a calculation. She had been a calculation all along. The police officers are here to escort you both for questioning. The attorney continued his clinical delivery. Miss Moreau, you're not under arrest, but the DA's office will want your testimony. You may wish to consult an attorney of your own. I can't afford an attorney. Vivian heard herself say the words, but they seemed to come from somewhere far away. I imagine you can't afford much of anything now. Margot's voice wasn't unkind, exactly. Just matter of fact. Everything he gave you was mine to begin with. I suggest you start considering how you'll rebuild your life from whatever's actually yours. As the officers moved toward Dominic, he made one last desperate attempt to reach Vivian. Viv, please, you have to understand. I really did love you. What we had was real, even if the circumstances weren't. Don't. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. The ice in her veins was crystallizing into something harder, something almost like steel. Don't you dare tell me what was real when you've spent 3 years constructing an elaborate lie. I don't know who you are. I don't know if anything you ever told me was true. The feelings were true. The feelings were a manipulation tool designed to keep me compliant and grateful. I was your escape. Your vacation from responsibility. Your uncomplicated fantasy. Margot's expression shifted slightly. Something almost like respect flickered across her features. She's smarter than you gave her credit for, Dominic. She always was. His voice was quiet as the officers led him away. And just like that, Vivian's entire world collapsed. The champagne pooled on the marble floor, mixing with shattered crystal. The roses suddenly seemed garish, their perfume cloying. The Manhattan skyline that had seemed so romantic now looked cold and indifferent. Everything he gave you was mine to begin with. The words echoed in Vivian's mind as she stood alone in the wreckage of her fairy tale, trying to remember who she had been before Dominic Caldwell had remade her into someone else's fantasy. Now, I want you to pause here and really feel this moment. 3 years. 1,095 days. That's how long Vivian had been living inside an elaborate performance. Every I love you, every anniversary, every quiet moment of connection. All of it constructed by a master manipulator who never saw her as a wife. She was a role. An escape. A vacation from his real responsibilities. But how did we get here? How does a woman fall so completely for a man who doesn't exist? To understand that, we need to go back 3 years, to a holiday party where a struggling MBA graduate met the man who would change and nearly destroy her life. Vivian Moreau was 28 years old and 2 weeks away from losing her apartment. The company holiday party at the Grand Excelsior was exactly the kind of event she hated. Crystal chandeliers dripping with elegance. Waiters circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than her daily food budget. And everywhere, people who belonged here. People who wore their wealth like a second skin. Vivian had borrowed her dress from a friend and prayed no one would notice the minor stain on the hem. Her heels were 3 years old and pinched her feet. Her jewelry was costume, careful imitations that would fool no one who looked closely. She was supposed to be networking. Her boss had made that very clear. This party is full of potential clients, Vivian. Don't waste the opportunity. Instead, she found herself hiding near the coat check, nursing a glass of cheap wine and pretending she belonged among people who probably spent more on their watches than she earned in a year. You look like you're calculating escape routes. Vivian turned to find the most handsome man she had ever seen smiling at her with genuine warmth. He was tall, distinguished, with the kind of graying temples that made men look sophisticated rather than old. His suit was obviously expensive, but he wore it casually, like wealth was something he didn't think about. Is it that obvious? She heard herself ask, surprising herself with honesty. Only to someone who's doing the same calculation. He extended his hand. Dominic Caldwell. And before you ask, no, I'm not one of them. I'm just here because my business partner insisted I needed to make connections. Vivian Moreau. And I'm here because my boss said attendance was mandatory. Then we're both prisoners. His smile widened, creating crinkles around warm brown eyes. Shall we escape together? They had walked through Central Park in the snow that night, talking until 3 in the morning about everything and nothing. Dominic had been different from anyone she had ever met. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He was interested in her ideas, her dreams, her struggles. "Tell me about where you grew up," he had asked as they walked past the frozen Bethesda fountain. "Louisiana. Small town outside New Orleans. My father left when I was 6, so it was just me, my mother, and my grandmother. That must have been difficult." It was sometimes. Vivian had found herself opening up in a way she rarely did. "My grandmother was the one who held everything together. She used to say that dreams were just prayers with plans attached." "I like that." Dominic had stopped walking and turned to face her. "Dreams as prayers with plans. What's your dream, Vivian?" She had hesitated, unused to anyone asking that question like they actually wanted to know the answer. "I want to start my own creative agency someday. Help artists and creators build authentic brands. Give people a platform to share their real selves with the world." "That's a beautiful dream." He had taken her hand, and even through her gloves, she could feel the warmth of him. "What's stopping you?" "Reality?" She had laughed. "Money, connections, experience, all the usual barriers. Those are obstacles, not impossibilities." His thumb had traced circles on her palm. "The right person believes in you, doors start opening." She should have heard the warning in those words. The subtle implication that he could be that person. That he could open those doors. That her dreams could become dependent on his belief. But she had been cold and lonely and so tired of struggling. And here was this kind, handsome man who seemed to see something in her that no one else had ever noticed. By their 3rd date, she was falling. By their 10th, she was gone entirely. Dominic revealed his wealth gradually, with the precision of an expert manipulator. First came the expensive restaurants where he always insisted on paying. Then the private car service that seemed to appear whenever she needed transportation. Then casual mentions of his work. "My investment firm is having a good quarter. The board meeting ran long today. I'm flying to Singapore next week for a merger." Each detail painted a picture of success without overwhelming her. He never flaunted his money. He just quietly surrounded her with it until luxury started to feel normal. When she finally understood the full scope of his wealth, one of the largest private equity companies on the eastern seaboard, she had been terrified. "Does it bother you?" he had asked, genuine concern in those warm brown eyes. "The money? It's just so much." She had been sitting in his Tribeca apartment for the first time, surrounded by artwork that probably cost more than her student loans. "I don't know if I belong in your world." He had crossed the room and taken her face in his hands. "You belong wherever you are, Vivian. The money doesn't define me. You know that." "I do." She had believed it, too. Because he had never made her feel lesser. Never talked down to her. Never implied that her background made her unworthy. "I just don't want people to think I'm with you for your money. People who matter will know the truth." He had kissed her then, gentle and reassuring. "And anyone who doesn't understand what we have isn't worth our time." 6 months later, they were married. The ceremony had been small and intimate, held at a private vineyard in Napa Valley. Dominic had explained that his family, old money, complicated dynamics, wouldn't approve of her background. Better to present the marriage as a done deal rather than seeking permission that would never come. "My grandmother has old-fashioned ideas about class and breeding." He had seemed almost embarrassed. "She still thinks marriages should be arranged between appropriate families. I've been fighting her expectations my whole life." Vivian had understood, or thought she had. She had her own complicated family dynamics. Her own wounds from feeling like she didn't belong. "It's just us against the world," Dominic had whispered against her hair on their wedding night. "That's all we need." And Vivian, intoxicated by love and the dizzying transformation of her circumstances, had believed every word. She had given up her small apartment and moved into the Tribeca place. She had quit her entry-level marketing job because Dominic insisted she should focus on developing her business plan. She had gradually lost touch with her few friends because she was always traveling with Dominic, always caught up in his world. She hadn't noticed the isolation happening. It had felt like being chosen. Like being special. Like finally finding someone who understood her value. Looking back now, from the wreckage of that penthouse suite, Vivian could see the manipulation for what it was. Every romantic gesture had served a purpose. Every declaration of love had tightened the invisible chains. He had told her she was too talented for her job, so she quit. He had told her they needed privacy to protect their love, so she stopped seeing friends. He had told her his family wouldn't understand her, so she never pushed to meet them. And when she had asked about officially filing their marriage paperwork, about legally joining their lives, he had always had a reason to delay. My accountants need to restructure some assets first. Tax implications. Let's wait until after the quarterly reports. I don't want the board asking questions. My grandmother is ill. It's not the right time to upset her with official announcements. Eventually. That was his favorite word. Eventually, they would file the paperwork. Eventually, she would meet his family. Eventually, they would have the public wedding she sometimes dreamed about. Eventually never came. Because eventually was never meant to come. And now here she was, standing in a penthouse suite that had never been hers, wearing a ring that meant nothing, mourning a marriage that had never existed. 3 months later, Vivian Moreau had lost everything. Not almost everything. Not most things. Everything. The legal proceedings had been thorough in their devastation. Margot's attorneys had traced every penny that had flowed through Vivian's life during her fake marriage, and every penny had been claimed. The Tribeca apartment? She had never been on the lease. She was evicted within 2 weeks. The credit cards? All in Dominic's name, all cancelled immediately. The cars? Registered to a corporation Dominic controlled. Repossessed. The bank accounts? Joint accounts she had access to but never owned. Frozen and emptied. The jewelry? Purchased with marital assets. Margot wanted it back. The designer clothes? Legally questionable, though Margot had magnanimously allowed her to keep them. As if they were doing her a favor by letting her keep the costume she had unknowingly worn. When Vivian took inventory of what was actually, legally, verifiably hers, the list fit on a single post-it note. Clothes from before Dominic. Her grandmother's worn cookbook. A journal filled with business ideas she had never pursued. A phone with contacts who no longer returned her calls. She found a studio apartment in Queens, the kind of place where she could touch both walls from her bed. The refrigerator hummed too loudly at night. The heating was unreliable. The water pressure was terrible. But it was hers. It was in her name. It was real. She got a job waitressing at a diner because it paid cash daily and didn't require references she couldn't provide. Her feet ached constantly. Her hands were rough from hot plates and dish soap. She came home smelling like coffee and grease. Every night, she would sit on her second-hand futon and stare at the water-stained ceiling, replaying every moment of her fake marriage. Searching for the seams she should have seen. The red flags she had ignored. The lies she had wanted too badly to be true. Why hadn't she pushed harder to meet his family? Why hadn't she insisted on being part of the legal paperwork? Why hadn't she questioned the constant delays and excuses? Because she had wanted it to be real. Because the fantasy was so much better than her reality. Because loving Dominic had been easier than being alone. But the private torment was nothing compared to the public humiliation. The tabloids had latched onto the story with gleeful viciousness. Billionaire's secret wife exposed. The other woman who didn't know. Fake bride loses everything. Her face was everywhere. Photos snapped outside courthouses. Images taken through diner windows where she worked. Screenshots from her social media accounts before she deleted them all. The comments were worse. She had to know. Nobody is that naive. Classic gold digger trying to play victim. I would have caught on in the first month. How stupid do you have to be? Some days, Vivian couldn't leave her apartment because she was afraid someone would recognize her. Other days, she forced herself out because hiding felt too much like admitting they were right. That she was stupid. That she had been complicit in her own destruction. The depositions were their own particular hell. As a witness in the criminal case against Dominic, Vivian was required to testify multiple times. Each session forced her to relive every detail of her fake marriage under the harsh light of legal scrutiny. Miss Moreau, can you describe the circumstances of your first meeting with Mr. Caldwell? She had told them about the holiday party. About Central Park in the snow. About falling in love with a man who had orchestrated every moment of their encounter. Did you ever question why Mr. Caldwell's family was absent from your wedding ceremony? She had explained about the old money grandmother. The complicated family dynamics. The lies she had believed because she wanted to believe them. Please describe the nature of your physical relationship. She had sat in that cold conference room, exposing the most intimate details of what she had thought was her marriage, while lawyers took notes and recorded every word for the permanent record. Walk us through the financial access he provided. The credit cards. The bank accounts. The apartment she had thought was theirs. Each item catalogued as evidence of fraud. Every question was a scalpel, cutting into memories she had once treasured and exposing them as contaminated. That sunset proposal on a Napa hillside? A calculated performance with paid witnesses. Those whispered promises in the dark? Scripted manipulation designed to keep her compliant. That feeling of finally being loved completely? The biggest lie of all. After one particularly brutal session, Vivian had escaped to the courthouse bathroom and locked herself in a stall. She sat on the closed toilet seat and stared at her hands, the hands that had trembled signing a marriage certificate that wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. She didn't cry. She was beyond tears now. She just felt empty. Hollow. Like Dominic had scooped out everything that made her herself and replaced it with his fiction. When she finally emerged from the stall, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and stopped. The woman looking back was a stranger. Not because she had aged or changed physically, but because that woman's entire identity had been constructed by someone else. Without Dominic's reflection beside her, she had no idea who she was supposed to be. 3 months of wreckage. 3 months of public humiliation. 3 months of trying to survive on minimum wage and the shattered remnants of her self-respect. And then, something unexpected happened. After a particularly grueling deposition, Vivian was gathering her things to leave when a paralegal approached her. Miss Moreau? Mrs. Caldwell has requested a private meeting with you. Vivian's stomach dropped. She had managed to avoid direct confrontation with Margot since that devastating afternoon in the penthouse. The thought of sitting across from the woman whose husband she had unknowingly been sleeping with for 3 years made her physically ill. I don't think that's a good idea. She was insistent. The paralegal seemed almost apologetic. She said it's important. Conference room 3. Every instinct screamed at Vivian to walk away. To leave the building and never look back. But there was something in the paralegal's tone that gave her pause. Important how? I don't know. But she said it could benefit you both. Against her better judgment, Vivian found herself walking toward conference room 3. The room was expensive in a way that made her current poverty feel even more acute. Mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Leather chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan with a view that suggested power and permanence. Margot Caldwell sat at the head of the table, looking exactly as she had that afternoon in the penthouse. Perfect. Composed. Absolutely in control. Please sit. Margot gestured to a chair across from her. This won't take long. Vivian sat, keeping her back straight and her hands steady through sheer force of will. What do you want? Direct. Good. I appreciate that. Margot studied her for a long moment. I spent the first 2 months hating you. I understand why you would. I imagined you were some gold digger who knew exactly what she was doing. Seducing a married man for access to his fortune. Playing dumb when you got caught. Vivian said nothing. There was no point defending herself to people who had already decided she was guilty. But the more I learned about what Dominic did. Margot paused, and something flickered behind her perfect composure. How he targeted you. How carefully he constructed the illusion. How systematically he isolated you from anyone who might have helped you see the truth. I realized I had been wrong about you. You think I'm not a gold digger. Vivian kept her voice flat, not allowing herself to hope. I think you're a victim. Just a different kind of victim than me. The words hung in the air between them. Vivian felt something crack inside her chest. Not healing, exactly. But something. I've been looking into your background. Margot pulled a folder from her bag. Before Dominic. Your academic record. The business plan you developed during your MBA. Your work history before you met him. Why? Because I'm trying to figure out what kind of person you actually are. Divorced from who Dominic made you into. Vivian stared at the folder. She recognized the cover page. It was her old MBA project. The creative agency she had dreamed of starting before Dominic swept her into his fantasy. This is brilliant work. Margot opened the folder and turned pages covered with Vivian's notes, her projections, her vision. Why did you never pursue it? The question hit harder than Vivian expected. Because I thought I didn't need to. Dominic said I could work on it eventually. When the timing was right. When his family situation was settled. When we were more established. Eventually. Margot's voice was sharp. Eventually. That's how he controlled you. The promises of eventually. Eventually you could start your business. Eventually you would meet his family. Eventually everything would be official and permanent. Vivian nodded slowly. It kept me waiting. Hoping. Trusting that the future would be different. Instead of demanding anything in the present. Yes. Margot closed the folder and pushed it across the table toward Vivian. The man with the briefcase at the hotel that afternoon. Daniel. He's not just my attorney. He's also my business partner. We run an investment firm that specializes in backing women-owned startups. Vivian stared at her. I don't understand. We're interested in funding this agency. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about business. And despite what I might feel personally about the circumstances that brought you into my life, I believe in profitable investments. Margot's expression was unreadable. This concept is solid. Your execution strategy is innovative. And frankly, you have more motivation to succeed than almost anyone I've ever considered funding. Motivation. You have everything to prove. To yourself. To everyone who will see you as a victim. To every person who will whisper about you at parties and read about you in tabloids. Vivian felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Something that felt almost like hope. Why would you do this? Help me? For the first time, something almost like a smile crossed Margot's features. Because nothing drives success like spite with a strategic plan. And I suspect you have plenty of spite right now. Vivian looked down at the folder in front of her. Her business plan. Her dream. The thing she had set aside because Dominic told her eventually was good enough. I have nothing. She heard herself say. No money. No connections. No reputation except as a punchline. You have the plan. Margot nodded toward the folder. You have the drive. I've seen it in those depositions. The way you hold yourself together when anyone else would fall apart. That's not weakness. That's the kind of steel that builds empires. And you just want to invest. Out of the goodness of your heart. I want to make money. My heart has nothing to do with it. Margot stood, gathering her things. But if it helps, I also want to show my soon-to-be ex-husband that the woman he threw away is going to be more successful than he ever imagined. There's poetry in that, don't you think? Poetry. Consider it, Miss Moreau. You have my number. Margot walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. One more thing. She turned back to face Vivian. My divorce will be finalized in 3 months. Dominic will lose everything. The company, the properties, the investments. He'll be left with nothing but his prison commissary account. Good. The word came out harder than Vivian intended. But that's not justice. Margot's eyes locked with hers. Justice is you building something real from what he took. Justice is you becoming someone he can't ignore or dismiss or control. That's the revenge that actually matters. She left without waiting for a response. Vivian sat alone in the expensive conference room, staring at a business plan she had written years ago when she still believed in dreams. When she still thought prayers needed plans. When she still hoped the future could be different from the past. Nothing drives success like spite with a strategic plan. For the first time in 3 months, Vivian Moreau felt something besides defeat. She felt possibility. Now, I want you to pause here with me. Because what happens next in this story changes everything. If you've ever been at your absolute lowest, if you've ever wondered how you'd possibly survive, this is for you. Smash that like button if you believe that rock bottom can become a foundation. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever received help from the most unexpected source? Sometimes our greatest allies come from the strangest places. That night, Vivian sat in her tiny Queens apartment with the folder spread across her futon. She read through her own words from 3 years ago, the passionate vision of a woman who believed she could build something meaningful. Who believed that authenticity mattered. Who believed that helping others find their voice was worth dedicating her life to. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone innocent and hopeful who didn't know yet how thoroughly the world could betray her. But somewhere beneath the wreckage, beneath the shame and the fear and the exhaustion, Vivian could feel that woman stirring. Demanding to be heard. Her grandmother's voice echoed from years ago, from a tiny kitchen in Louisiana where an old woman taught a young girl that strength was a choice. When life burns everything down, you get to choose what grows back. Vivian looked around her cramped apartment. The water-stained ceiling. The humming refrigerator. The second-hand furniture that smelled faintly of someone else's life. This was her rock bottom. This was as low as it got. Which meant the only direction left was up. She pulled out her phone and found Margot's number in the contacts list. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. What did she have to lose? Her reputation was already destroyed. Her savings were gone. Her self-respect had been systematically dismantled. She had nothing left except spite and a dream she had almost forgotten how to believe in. She pressed call. Margot answered on the second ring. Miss Moreau. I hoped you would call. I have questions. I would expect nothing less. Why did you look into my background? Really? Not the business answer. The real answer. There was a pause. Then Margot's voice, softer than Vivian had ever heard it. Because I spent 18 years married to a man who made me feel like I wasn't enough. Who made me feel like I had to be perfect or he would find someone to replace me. And it turns out he found someone anyway. Someone who made him happy in ways I apparently couldn't. I didn't make him happy. I was just easier to lie to. Probably. Another pause. But I realized something, reading through those depositions. Watching you testify. Seeing how you held yourself together. We both lost something to Dominic's lies. But you lost something more precious than I did. What did I lose? 3 years of your life when you should have been building your career. Your reputation, which I can help rebuild. Your trust in your own judgment. And what did you lose? The illusion that my marriage was real. Margot's laugh was bitter. But I still have my children. My family name. My fortune. My social standing. I lost an illusion. You lost everything real. Vivian absorbed this. The strange honesty between them. Two women destroyed by the same man, reaching toward each other across the wreckage. I want to do this. Her voice was steady. The business. But I need you to understand something. What's that? I'm not doing it because you're offering. I'm not doing it to prove anything to Dominic. I'm doing it because somewhere in the middle of all that wreckage, I found something I forgot I had. What? The woman I was before he got his hands on me. The one who believed dreams were prayers with plans. Vivian took a breath. I'm going to build this company. I'm going to make it successful. And when I do, it won't be because of him or despite him. It will be because of me. A long silence. Then Margot's voice, warm for the first time. Now that sounds like a woman worth investing in. The deal took 2 weeks to finalize. Investment capital. Legal formation. Brand development. Vivian threw herself into the work with an intensity that left no room for grief or doubt. The name came to her at 3 in the morning, staring at her ceiling in that Queen's apartment. Lumiere. Light. Because she had lived in someone else's shadow for 3 years, performing a role in his darkness. Now she was going to create something that helped others shine. Lumiere Creative Agency. Authentic representation for authentic voices. She rented a converted closet in a co-working space. It was barely big enough for a desk and a chair, with a window that looked out onto an alley. But it was hers. Legally, legitimately, actually hers. The first rejection came in her second week. She had reached out to a promising young artist, an illustrator whose work Vivian believed could resonate with major brands. They met for coffee, and everything seemed to be going well until the artist's expression shifted. Wait. You're that woman. The one from the tabloids. Vivian kept her face neutral. I am. The one who was married to the billionaire. Except not really married. That's correct. The artist leaned back, something ugly in her expression. I don't work with women who steal other people's husbands. She left without finishing her coffee. Vivian sat alone at the table for 20 minutes, breathing carefully, refusing to let the tears fall where anyone could see. Then she pulled out her notebook and added a name to a list she had started keeping. People who will eat their words. It was petty. It was spite. But it was also fuel. The first client who said yes was a struggling painter named Jade who didn't care about Vivian's past. She only cared about her vision. I've been trying to get representation for 2 years. Jade sat in Vivian's tiny closet office, looking around at the bare walls and second-hand desk. Nobody takes emerging artists seriously. We're too risky. Not commercial enough. I think your work is extraordinary. Vivian meant it. Jade's paintings were visceral, emotional, the kind of art that grabbed you by the throat and didn't let go. And I think the right strategy could connect you with people who would pay real money for that emotional experience. What kind of strategy? The authentic kind. No gimmicks. No manufactured controversy. Just your truth, presented to the people who need to see it. Jade studied her for a long moment. Why do you care so much about authenticity? Vivian could have given a business answer. Something about market positioning or brand differentiation. Instead, she told the truth. Because I spent 3 years living someone else's lie. Being whoever he needed me to be. Performing a version of myself that didn't actually exist. She met Jade's eyes. I know what it costs to lose yourself in someone else's story. I won't let that happen to anyone I represent. Jade signed that afternoon. The first success came 3 months later. Vivian had managed to get Jade's work featured in a small gallery show. Nothing major. No big names or industry attention. Just an opportunity to be seen. Except someone saw. A collector with deep pockets and deeper Instagram following had walked into the gallery on a whim. She had posted about Jade's work to her 100,000 followers. Within a week, Jade had sold every piece in the show and had a waiting list for commissions. Vivian's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Other artists wanted to know how she had done it. What magic formula she had used to turn an unknown painter into an overnight sensation. There was no formula. Just authenticity, properly positioned. Just truth, carefully presented to the right audience. Lumiere wasn't an overnight success. Success never really happens overnight, no matter what the stories say. But it grew. Steadily. Persistently. The way things grow when you pour yourself into them completely. First hire. A young assistant fresh out of college who reminded Vivian of herself before Dominic. First real office. Still small, but with windows that faced a street instead of an alley. First major feature. A trade publication that wanted to know how an unknown agency was generating such impressive results for emerging artists. Vivian told them the truth. The version of the truth she had learned to tell. I learned the hard way that inauthenticity has costs. My agency exists to protect artists from those costs. She didn't mention Dominic. She didn't need to. Everyone who read the article knew exactly what she was referring to. The whispers continued. They probably always would. That's the woman. The one who didn't know she wasn't really married. Can you imagine? But gradually, other whispers joined them. She's actually really good at her job. Her clients are doing amazing. I heard she turned that scandal into a whole business philosophy. Maybe she's not just a victim. Maybe she's actually someone. 1 year after Margot's offer, Lumiere Creative Agency had a team of 6, represented 15 artists, and had turned a profit every quarter. 2 years after, the team had grown to 12, the client list to 37, and Vivian had been named to a local 40 under 40 list. 18 months after signing her first client in a converted closet, Vivian stood in a corner office overlooking the Hudson River and felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Pride. Real pride. Earned pride. She had built this. Not Dominic's money. Not Margot's investment, though that had certainly helped. She had built it with 16-hour days and rejected pitches and the relentless determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. Every artist she signed, she asked them the same question. Is this work authentically yours? She had spent 3 years as someone else's creation. Now she was in the business of protecting creative ownership. And there was poetry in that, even if she hadn't planned it. Sometimes, late at night, she would think about Dominic. Wonder if he knew what she had become. Wonder if he cared. Wonder if he ever thought about the woman he had used and discarded. But those moments came less frequently now. He was becoming smaller in her memory. Not the defining event of her life, just a chapter. An important chapter, certainly. A devastating chapter. But not the whole story. The story was still being written. And this time, she was the one holding the pen. This is where I need you to stop and really take in what has happened here. A woman who lost everything, her money, her identity, her reputation, didn't just survive. She thrived. If her story resonates with you, if you believe that transformation is possible even from the darkest places, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the story of someone else's comeback is exactly what we need to believe in our own. Subscribe if you haven't already. You won't want to miss what happens next. Because Vivian's story is far from over. Just when she thought she had finally escaped Dominic's shadow, the past is about to come crashing back into her present. A young woman is about to walk into her office with a desperate plea for help. And Vivian will discover that some predators never stop hunting. They just find new prey. The photographer adjusted her camera for the final shots while Vivian sat in her corner office, the Manhattan skyline stretching behind her like a promise kept. The walls were covered now. Awards. Client features. Magazine covers showcasing artists she had helped become household names. 5 years ago, she had been hiding near a coat check at a party, hoping no one would notice the stain on her borrowed dress. Now Forbes wanted her face in their pages. Just a few more questions for the profile. The interviewer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, reviewed her notes. You have been remarkably open about your past. Do you ever regret making it public? Vivian considered the question. She had been asked versions of it hundreds of times, but she never gave a rehearsed answer. Each time, she tried to find something true. I didn't make it public. The criminal trial did that. I just chose not to hide from it. Rachel leaned forward. That is an interesting distinction. When your worst moment is splashed across tabloids, when strangers are debating your intelligence and your motives in comment sections, you have two choices. Vivian's voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who had practiced being calm until it became natural. You can disappear and let them define you. Or you can step forward and define yourself. I chose to step forward. Some critics say you have capitalized on victimhood. Vivian almost smiled. She had heard this criticism so many times it had lost its sting. Some critics have never had to rebuild their entire life from wreckage. It is easy to judge survival strategies from the comfort of circumstances that never required them. So you don't see it as capitalizing. I used every resource available to me, including my own painful story, to build something meaningful. Vivian gestured at the office around her. If that is capitalizing, then capitalism looks a lot different from the inside than critics seem to think. Rachel nodded, making notes. Your company now represents some of the most sought-after artists in the country. You have expanded into 3 markets. Where do you see Lumiere in 5 years? Growing. Evolving. Helping more artists find their authentic voice in a market that often rewards imitation. Vivian paused, choosing her words with care. I spent 3 years as someone else's creation. A role in a narrative I did not even know I was performing. Now I help artists ensure their work is genuinely theirs. There is poetry in that, even if I did not plan it. And personally? Rachel's pen hovered over her notepad. Any romantic prospects? I am focused on the work. On building something that matters. On proving that what happened to me was a chapter, not my entire story. You have never spoken about Dominic Caldwell directly since the trial. Any thoughts on his release 6 months ago? Vivian felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the one that appeared whenever his name was spoken. But she had learned to breathe through it. To let it pass without controlling her. He served his time. That chapter of my life is closed. He is reportedly trying to rebuild. claiming rehabilitation and seeking investor meetings. Does that concern you? Anyone foolish enough to trust a documented con artist with their money deserves the consequences. Vivian's voice carried no emotion. I have neither sympathy nor concern. Just distance. The interview concluded with handshakes and professional pleasantries. Rachel promised the article would be respectful and thorough. Vivian walked her to the lobby personally, a habit she had maintained even as her company grew. Real connection mattered. Authentic relationship building mattered. Everything Dominic had faked was everything she now practiced genuinely. As she returned to her office, her assistant Marcus intercepted her in the hallway. Ms. Moreau, there is someone in the conference room. She showed up without an appointment but insists it is urgent. Vivian frowned. You know I do not see people without appointments. I know. Marcus looked uncomfortable. But she was very insistent. She said it involves Dominic Caldwell. The name hit Vivian like a physical blow. After 3 years of building, she had hoped she was finally free of that shadow. But some shadows, it seemed, refused to fade. Who is she? She would not give details. Just said she needed to speak with you and that it was a matter of life and death. Life and death. That seemed dramatic. But Vivian remembered how she had felt in those early days after the revelation. How everything had seemed like life and death because her entire existence had been upended. Fine. Give me 5 minutes, then send her in. Vivian used the time to compose herself. She straightened papers that did not need straightening. Adjusted frames that were already perfectly aligned. Small rituals of control that reminded her she was no longer the woman who had shattered champagne glasses and lost everything. The woman who entered her conference room was young. Mid-20s at most. She had the look of someone who had been crying recently and was trying desperately to hold herself together. Red-rimmed eyes. Trembling hands. The particular pallor of someone who had not been sleeping. Miss Moreau? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I am so sorry to interrupt. I did not know where else to go. Vivian gestured to a chair across the table. Please sit. Tell me who you are and why you are here. The young woman sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My name is Geneva Lawson. Dominic Caldwell has been dating my mother for 4 months. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Vivian gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. He told her they are getting married next month. Geneva continued, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. And I just found articles online about what he did to you. About the fake marriage and the fraud and everything. But my mother will not believe me. She says I am jealous and paranoid and trying to ruin her happiness. Vivian forced herself to breathe. How did your mother meet him? At a grief support group. Geneva's voice cracked. My father died 8 months ago. Car accident. He left my mother with a significant life insurance settlement. She was lonely and devastated, and then this charming man appeared who seemed to understand exactly what she was going through. The precision of it made Vivian sick. Targeting a widow at a grief support group. Using her vulnerability and her money as bait. It was the same playbook, executed on a new victim. What has he told her about himself? That he is a widower too. That his wife died of cancer 3 years ago. That he understands loss and wants to help her heal. Geneva wiped at her eyes. He has already convinced her to add him to some of her accounts. For convenience, he said. So he can help manage things while she is grieving. Vivian closed her eyes. The audacity. The unrelenting, sociopathic audacity. Less than a year out of prison, and he was already running the same con. Because that was what predators did. They did not stop. They just found new hunting grounds. Why did you come to me? Vivian asked quietly. Because you survived him. Geneva met her eyes, and Vivian saw desperation there. Raw and genuine and heartbreaking. I read everything I could find about what happened to you. How he manipulated you. How he isolated you. How he made you believe in something that was not real. And I thought maybe you would understand. Maybe you would know how to make my mother see the truth before it is too late. Vivian looked at this young woman, this daughter trying to save her mother from the same predator who had nearly destroyed her. 5 years ago, Vivian had been alone. No one had come to warn her. No one had seen through Dominic's charm until it was too late. But Geneva was not alone. Geneva had found her. Tell me everything. Vivian pulled out a notepad. Every detail you can remember. How they met. What he has said. What access he has to her finances. Everything. For the next hour, Geneva talked and Vivian listened. The pattern was identical to what she had experienced. The careful charm. The manufactured vulnerability. The gradual assumption of financial control disguised as helpfulness. But there were differences too. Dominic was working faster this time. More aggressively. Perhaps prison had made him impatient, or perhaps he sensed that his window of opportunity was closing. He has already mentioned marriage. Geneva's voice was hollow. After 4 months. He says when you know. That their connection is special. That my mother deserves someone who appreciates her after everything she has been through. And your mother believes him. She wants to believe him. Geneva's hands twisted in her lap. She is so lonely. My father was the love of her life, and losing him broke something in her. Dominic makes her feel like maybe she can be happy again. She does not want to see that it is all a lie. Vivian nodded slowly. She understood that desperation. That need to believe in something beautiful even when the evidence suggested otherwise. Have you told her about my case? About what he did? I tried. Geneva's frustration was evident. She said those articles were probably exaggerated. That people get accused of things unfairly all the time. That I should meet him properly before judging him. And have you met him? Once. At dinner 3 weeks ago. Geneva shuddered slightly. He was charming. Attentive. He asked about my work, my interests, my father's memory. All the right things in all the right ways. But there was something in his eyes when he looked at my mother's house. When he mentioned her investments. Something calculating. You saw it. I saw it because I was looking for it. My mother was not looking. She just saw a kind man who understood her grief. Vivian sat back in her chair, thinking. This was not her problem. She had spent 5 years building a new life, putting distance between herself and everything Dominic represented. Getting involved now would drag her back into that darkness. But she remembered Margot's words from years ago. The only justice that matters is you building something real from what he took. She had built something real. She had proven that she was more than what Dominic had tried to make her. But maybe real justice was not just about her own success. Maybe it was about making sure he could never do this to anyone else. Does your mother know you are here? Vivian asked. No. She would be furious if she knew. Geneva's voice dropped. She thinks I am trying to sabotage her happiness because I have not processed my own grief. Dominic has been very helpful in suggesting that narrative. Of course he has. Vivian recognized the isolation tactic. Turn the family against each other. Make the victim trust him more than her own daughter. Classic manipulation. I need to make some calls. Vivian stood and moved toward her phone. There are people I need to consult before we decide on next steps. We? Geneva's eyes widened with hope. We. Vivian met her gaze steadily. I spent 5 years building a life that Dominic Caldwell could not touch. I am not going to let him destroy someone else's life while I have the power to stop him. Thank you. Geneva's voice broke. Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet. We do not know if we can stop him in time. But we are going to try. Vivian picked up her phone and dialed a number she had not called in months. Margot answered on the third ring. Vivian. This is unexpected. He is doing it again. A long pause. Then Margot's voice, sharp with understanding. Tell me everything. 2 days later, they gathered in Margot's conference room. The war room, Vivian had started calling it in her head. Margot at the head of the table, every inch the formidable businesswoman who had rebuilt her own life from the ashes of Dominic's betrayal. Daniel, her attorney and business partner, with files spread before him. Geneva, nervous but determined. And Vivian, who could not quite believe she was back in this world after fighting so hard to escape it. I have had my investigators looking into his activities since his release. Margot's voice was crisp and professional. He has been careful. No obvious violations of his parole conditions. But there are patterns. What kind of patterns? Geneva leaned forward. He has made contact with at least 3 other women in the past 6 months. All of them recently widowed or divorced. All of them with significant assets. Daniel opened a folder and spread photos across the table. Your mother was not his first attempt since prison. She is just the first one who did not recognize him from the news coverage. Vivian studied the photos. 3 women, all around the same age as Geneva's mother. All with the look of people who had recently lost something precious. All perfect targets. Why did the others not fall for it? Geneva asked. One of them had a daughter who remembered the case and warned her. Another Googled him before their second date. The third had a financial advisor who ran a background check before any accounts were modified. Margot's expression was grim. Your mother apparently has none of those safeguards. She stopped seeing our family financial advisor 3 months ago. Geneva's voice was bitter. Dominic suggested she did not need someone taking a percentage of her money just to tell her what to do with it. He could help her manage things himself. Of course he could. Vivian recognized every move. Classic isolation. Remove the professional advisors. Remove the family support. Make the victim dependent entirely on the predator. So what do we do? Geneva looked around the table desperately. How do we stop him? Daniel cleared his throat. His parole conditions include restrictions on financial dealings without disclosure. If we can prove he has accessed your mother's accounts or positioned himself for financial gain, that would be a violation. But we need proof. Margot added. Proof that will hold up in court and with his parole officer. What about just telling my mother the truth? Geneva asked. Showing her all the evidence from his trial? We tried that approach with the other potential victims. Daniel shook his head. The women who already suspected something were receptive. But your mother sounds like she is deeply emotionally invested. She may interpret confrontation as an attack on her judgment and double down on trusting him. So we need to catch him in the act. Vivian spoke quietly, thinking through the possibilities. We need him to reveal himself in a way she cannot deny or rationalize. He has a dinner planned. Geneva pulled out her phone. Next Friday. He told my mother he wants to introduce her to some of his business partners. People who can vouch for his success and stability. Vivian and Margot exchanged glances. Business partners, Vivian repeated. The same strategy he used with me. Margot's voice was ice. Fake witnesses. Paid actors. Creating the illusion of legitimacy. So we replace his fake dinner with a real one. Vivian felt a plan crystallizing in her mind. We fill that restaurant with people who know exactly who he is and what he has done. Journalists. Daniel caught on immediately. His parole officer. Federal investigators who might be interested in whether he has violated his conditions. And us. Margot's smile was sharp as a blade. The women he already destroyed, waiting to greet him. He will run. Geneva said. The moment he sees you, he will leave. Let him try. Vivian's voice carried an edge she had not felt in years. The spite with a strategic plan that Margot had once described. Let him try to explain to your mother why he is fleeing a room full of people who want to talk about his past. Geneva's eyes were wide. You think she will believe us then? I think watching her beloved fiancé panic and run from a dinner party will raise questions she cannot ignore. Vivian leaned forward. And once those questions are raised, she will be ready to hear the truth. What if it does not work? Geneva asked quietly. What if she still chooses him over me? Margot answered before Vivian could. Then we will have done everything possible. The rest is up to her. We cannot save people who refuse to be saved. But we can give them every chance. Vivian added more gently. Every piece of evidence. Every opportunity to see clearly. If she still chooses not to look, that will be her choice. Not ours. Geneva nodded slowly, fear and hope warring in her expression. When do we start? Now. Margot stood, gathering her things. We have 1 week to prepare. Daniel, I want the federal investigators briefed. Media contacts lined up. Every piece of documentation we have on Dominic's methods ready to present. I will reach out to his parole officer. Daniel was already making notes. There may be restrictions we can leverage. And I will prepare your mother. Vivian turned to Geneva. Not to warn her directly. Just to plant seeds of doubt. Small observations. Gentle questions. Make her start wondering before the dinner. How? I was manipulated by the same man for 3 years. I know exactly what doubts would have broken through if anyone had known to raise them. Vivian's voice softened. Trust me. For the next week, they executed the plan with military precision. Daniel secured cooperation from federal investigators who had been monitoring Dominic's activities since his release. They had suspected he would reoffend but had lacked concrete evidence. The dinner would provide an opportunity to observe him in action. Margot coordinated with media contacts, ensuring that journalists would be present as witnesses but would hold their stories until after the confrontation. The last thing they needed was Dominic seeing headlines before the trap was sprung. Geneva arranged to have coffee with her mother twice, casual conversations where she asked innocent questions. Has Dominic talked about his past relationships? What happened to his first wife? Have you met any of his family? I would love to know more about his background. What do his business partners do exactly? It might be nice to understand his work before I meet them. Each question was designed to reveal gaps in the story Dominic had constructed. Details that did not quite add up. Answers that seemed rehearsed or evasive. Geneva reported back after each conversation. She is starting to notice. Her voice held cautious hope. When I asked about his family, she admitted he always changes the subject. And she could not explain exactly what his business partners do. Good. Vivian nodded. Keep planting seeds. By Friday, she will be primed to see what she has been missing. And Vivian herself spent the week preparing for something she had thought she would never do again. Face Dominic Caldwell. She had spent 5 years building distance between herself and that man. 5 years of therapy and growth and reclaiming her identity from the wreckage he had created. The thought of seeing him again made her physically ill. But some things were more important than comfort. Some stands had to be taken regardless of personal cost. The night before the dinner, Vivian stood in front of her bathroom mirror, practicing words she hoped she would get to say. "Hello, Dominic. Allow me to introduce you to your dinner companions." She watched her reflection speak. Watched her eyes stay steady and her voice stay calm. She was not the woman who had shattered champagne glasses in penthouse suites. She was someone else now. Someone he had never met. Someone he would never be able to manipulate again. Friday arrived with the crystalline clarity of a day that would change everything. The restaurant Dominic had chosen was upscale but not flashy. The kind of place where wealthy people conducted legitimate business. He had reserved a private dining room, presumably to control the environment and limit outside observations. He would not control this environment. They had made sure of that. By 6:30, the room was filled with people Dominic had not invited. Journalists sat at tables with notebooks hidden in purses and pockets. Federal investigators occupied a corner booth, looking for all the world like ordinary diners. Margot and Daniel sat near the entrance, positioned to block an easy exit. And Vivian stood in the center of it all, waiting. Geneva had texted 30 minutes ago. They just left the house. Should be there in 20 minutes. The waiting was the hardest part. 20 minutes of standing in a room full of people who all knew what was about to happen while Dominic walked blissfully toward his own unmasking. Vivian used the time to study the room. To note the exits. To plan exactly where she would stand when he walked through that door. 5 years ago, she had been blindsided in a penthouse suite. Everything had happened too fast. She had been unprepared, defenseless, destroyed before she even understood what was happening. Tonight, she would be the one doing the blindsiding. And Dominic would learn what it felt like to have your carefully constructed reality crumble in an instant. They are pulling into the parking lot. Geneva's text came through. Mom looks happy. This is going to break her heart. Vivian typed back quickly. Better a broken heart now than a destroyed life later. He is getting out of the car. He looks confident. Smug. Like he owns the world. Not for long. Vivian put her phone away and straightened her shoulders. Around her, the room fell silent. Everyone knew. The door opened. Dominic Caldwell walked in with the same confident stride that had first attracted Vivian at that holiday party 6 years ago. He was older now, the silver in his hair more pronounced, the lines around his eyes deeper. Prison had aged him in ways that wealth and comfort had not been able to prevent. But he still carried himself like a man who believed he could charm his way out of anything. A man who thought the world existed for his benefit. Behind him came Rosalind Lawson, Geneva's mother. She was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with the kind of quiet elegance that spoke of a life well lived. She looked at Dominic with open adoration, her hand resting trustingly on his arm. And behind her came Geneva, her face pale with tension, her eyes finding Vivian's across the room. Now. Geneva seemed to say without speaking. Do it now. Vivian stepped forward into the light. Hello, Dominic. The look on his face was worth 5 years of rebuilding. Worth every sleepless night and every humiliating deposition. Worth every tabloid headline and every whispered judgment. Shock first. Pure, undiluted shock as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. Then recognition. His ex-wife, his victim, the woman he had discarded, standing in the middle of his carefully planned evening. Then calculation, his mind already racing through possible explanations, possible exits, possible ways to maintain control of the situation. And finally, panic, as he realized there was no explanation, no exit, no control. The room was full of people looking at him with expressions that ranged from professional interest to barely contained fury. Vivian. His voice cracked slightly on her name. What are you doing here? Allow me to introduce you to your dinner companions. Vivian gestured around the room with calm precision. That is Rachel from Forbes, who recently interviewed me about my company. Those are investigators from the Federal Fraud Division. The gentleman by the door is your parole officer, who was very interested to learn about your recent financial activities. Dominic's face went gray. This is not what it looks like. Really? Because it looks exactly like what your parole officer suspected. You targeting another vulnerable woman. You positioning yourself for financial access. You running the same con that sent you to prison in the first place. Rosalind spoke for the first time, her voice confused. Dominic, what is she talking about? Who is this woman? This, Dominic, is Vivian Moreau. Margot stepped forward, her presence commanding instant attention. Formerly Vivian Caldwell. Or at least, she thought she was. Tell her, Dominic. Tell her how you married her in a fake ceremony and let her believe she was your wife for 3 years while you were still married to me. Rosalind's hand slipped from Dominic's arm. Married to her? For 18 years. Margot's voice was ice. We have 3 children together. Children who thought their father was on business trips while he was playing house with another woman. That is not. Dominic tried to rally, but his voice had lost all its charm. This is ancient history. I made mistakes. I paid for them. I have changed. Have you? Vivian pulled out a folder and opened it to reveal documents she and Daniel had prepared. Because according to these records, you have made contact with at least 4 women since your release. All recently widowed or divorced. All with significant assets. All fitting the same profile as your previous victims. Those are lies. Dominic's voice rose with desperation. I have not done anything wrong. I am allowed to date. I am allowed to have relationships. You are also required to disclose financial relationships to your parole officer. Daniel stepped forward with his own folder. Which you have failed to do. Specifically regarding funds transferred from Ms. Lawson's accounts into investment vehicles you control. What funds? Rosalind's voice was sharp now, fear replacing confusion. Dominic, what is he talking about? It is nothing. Dominic reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Just some minor account management. I was trying to help you. Help me by taking my money? I was not taking it. I was investing it. For our future. What future? Vivian's voice cut through his protests. The future where you marry her in another fake ceremony? Where you drain her accounts the way you drained mine? Where you disappear when the money runs out, leaving her with nothing? She does not understand. Dominic turned to Rosalind with desperate intensity. She is bitter. She is trying to ruin my life because she cannot accept that our relationship is over. Your relationship was never real. Margot's voice was cold. You admitted that in court. You pled guilty to fraud, identity manipulation, and financial crimes. You served 18 months in federal prison. Those are not accusations, Dominic. Those are facts. Rosalind was shaking now, looking between Dominic and the women confronting him. Geneva, you knew about this? I tried to tell you. Geneva's voice broke. I tried so many times. But you would not listen. Because I loved him. Rosalind's voice was barely a whisper. Because I thought he understood me. He understood how to use you. Vivian spoke gently now, recognizing the shattering happening in Rosalind's eyes. The same shattering she had experienced 5 years ago. That is what he does. He finds people who are hurting, and he uses their pain against them. I would never hurt you. Dominic made one last desperate attempt. Rosalind, please, you know me. I thought I knew you. Rosalind's voice grew stronger. But I am starting to realize I do not know you at all. The federal investigators were moving now, approaching Dominic with professional efficiency. "Mr. Caldwell, we have some questions about your recent financial activities. Your parole officer has authorized us to take you into custody pending a review of potential violations. This is harassment." Dominic tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. "I have done nothing wrong." "Then you will have no trouble explaining these bank transfers." One of the investigators held up a document. "And these account modifications. And these investment vehicles registered in your name using funds from Ms. Lawson's inheritance." Rosalind made a small sound, like something breaking inside her. "The inheritance? The money Thomas left me? There will be a full investigation," Daniel assured her. "If crimes have been committed, they will be prosecuted. If funds can be recovered, they will be returned. And you?" Rosalind turned to Dominic with a fury born of betrayal. "You used my grief. You used my loneliness. You used the money my husband worked his whole life to leave me. I loved you." Dominic's voice was pleading now, stripped of all its charm. "Whatever else happened, that was real. Nothing about you is real." Rosalind stepped back, creating distance between them. "You are a lie wrapped in a smile. And I cannot believe I almost married you." As the investigators led Dominic away, he made one last attempt to reach Vivian. "You did this." His voice was sharp with accusation. "You destroyed my life." Vivian met his eyes without flinching. "I am not doing anything to you. I am just telling the truth. Something you never bothered to try. You will regret this." "I regret a lot of things. 3 years of my life spent in your fantasy. Thousands of nights wondering how I missed the signs. Months of rebuilding from the wreckage you created." Vivian's voice was calm, steady, the voice of a woman who had already faced her worst fears and survived them. "But this? Stopping you from destroying another woman's life? This I will never regret." They took him away. Through the restaurant, past the witnesses who had seen everything, into a waiting vehicle that would transport him back to the justice system he had thought he had escaped. Vivian watched him go, waiting for the satisfaction to hit. The triumph. The vindication. Instead, she felt something quieter. Something almost like peace. In the aftermath, Rosalind collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face while Geneva held her hand and murmured reassurances. The journalists filed out quietly, already crafting the stories they would tell. The investigators gathered their evidence, preparing for the next steps in a legal process that would likely take months. And Vivian found herself standing alone by the window, looking out at a city that had witnessed both her destruction and her reconstruction. Margot appeared beside her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "You did good tonight." Vivian accepted the glass but did not drink. "I thought it would feel different." "Different how?" "Bigger, maybe. More dramatic. Like closure should feel like something." Margot was quiet for a moment. "Closure is not about their consequences. It is about your own peace. You have built something remarkable from your pain. That is your closure. His arrest is just paperwork." Vivian considered this. She thought about the company she had built. The artists she had helped. The life she had created from the ashes of Dominic's deception. "He wanted me to be grateful for the scraps he gave me," she said slowly. "Grateful for the fake marriage and the borrowed luxury and the identity he constructed. And instead? Instead I built something real. Something that is actually mine. Something he can never take away because he never gave it to me in the first place. That is your closure." Margot raised her glass. "To building something real." Vivian clinked her glass against Margot's and took a long sip. Behind her, she could hear Geneva comforting her mother, promising that things would be okay, that they would get through this together. Some things could not be fixed. Rosalind would have to rebuild, just as Vivian had. Just as Margot had. The pain was inevitable. But the destruction did not have to be permanent. And maybe that was the real victory. Not stopping Dominic's latest scheme, though that mattered. Not seeing him led away in handcuffs, though that was satisfying. But knowing that the women he had tried to destroy were still standing. Still fighting. Still capable of protecting each other and themselves. "Remember what I said when we first met?" Margot asked. "Nothing drives success like spite with a strategic plan." Vivian nodded. "I was wrong about that." "Oh? Spite gets you started." Margot's voice softened. "But purpose is what keeps you going. You stopped being about spite years ago, Vivian. Tonight was not about revenge. It was about protection." Vivian looked across the room at Geneva and Rosalind, the daughter who had refused to let her mother be destroyed, the mother who would have to find her way back to herself. "I was alone when it happened to me. No one came to warn me. No one stood between me and Dominic's lies. But you made sure Rosalind was not alone. That has to count for something. It counts for everything." 6 months later, the legal proceedings concluded. Dominic was convicted of parole violations, fraud, and attempted financial exploitation. His sentence was significantly longer this time, 15 years with no possibility of early release. Rosalind recovered most of her funds and began the slow process of healing. She and Geneva had rebuilt their relationship, stronger now for having survived the crisis together. They sent Vivian a Christmas card, a photo of the two of them in front of a tree, with a simple message. "Thank you for giving us back our future." The media coverage faded, as media coverage always did. Other scandals emerged to capture public attention. Vivian's name appeared less frequently in headlines, mentioned now primarily in connection with Lumiere's continued success. And success continued to come. 5 years to the day after Margot had offered her investment in a conference room downtown, Vivian stood in the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, looking out at a crowd that had gathered to celebrate Lumiere Creative Agency's 5th anniversary. The room was filled with artists she had helped launch into stardom. Clients who had trusted her with their creative visions. Investors who had believed in her mission. Media representatives who wanted to document the story of a woman who had transformed tragedy into triumph. And in the front row, Margot and Daniel, whose initial investment had made all of this possible. Beside them, Geneva and Rosalind, who had become unexpected friends in the aftermath of their shared trauma. And scattered throughout the room, the team Vivian had built, the assistants and managers and specialists who believed in authentic representation as much as she did. Vivian stepped to the podium, feeling the weight of the moment. The journey that had brought her here. The woman she had been. The woman she had become. 5 years ago, I learned that the life I thought I was living was actually someone else's elaborate lie. The room fell silent, everyone present knowing some version of her story but waiting to hear what she would make of it. Every certainty I had dissolved overnight. My identity. My marriage. My home. My sense of reality. All of it turned out to be fabrication. I could have defined myself by that victimization. Many people would have understood if I had simply disappeared, rebuilt quietly somewhere far from the headlines and the whispers. She paused, letting the words settle. Instead, I chose to build something that transformed my experience into purpose. Lumiere exists because I know what it means to have your authentic self stolen and replaced with someone else's creation. We help artists ensure their work remains genuinely theirs. We protect creative ownership because we understand what it costs to lose ownership of your own story. Applause rippled through the room, but Vivian held up her hand. But this celebration is not about me. It is about everyone who believed in this vision. It is about every artist who trusted us with their work. It is about every supporter who stood by us when the easy choice would have been to walk away. She raised her glass. To everyone who helped build Lumiere. To everyone who supported survivors when they needed it most. And to everyone who has ever had to rebuild from wreckage. Your story is not over. It is just becoming something more beautiful than you imagined. The applause that followed carried her through the rest of the evening. Through conversations and congratulations. Through business cards exchanged and partnerships proposed. Through the hundreds of small interactions that made up the life she had built. But the moment that mattered most came later. After the guests had gone and the staff was cleaning up, Vivian slipped away to a quiet terrace overlooking the city. Manhattan stretched before her, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each one containing stories of triumph and tragedy, of breaking and rebuilding. She had walked into that penthouse suite believing she was celebrating an anniversary. She had walked out believing her life was over. Instead, it had just begun. Not the life Dominic had constructed for her. Not the role she had performed in his fantasy. But a real life, built on real work, creating real value for real people. She thought about her grandmother's words from years ago. When life burns everything down, you get to choose what grows back. Vivian had chosen well. Sometimes the truth that destroys you is also the truth that sets you free. Sometimes the person who emerges from devastation is stronger, wiser, and more authentically themselves than they ever could have been without the breaking. Vivian Moreau had thought she married a billionaire. She had been wrong about everything except the most important truth. She was capable of building her own empire. One that no one could ever take away. One that was founded not on deception but on authenticity. Not on fantasy but on reality. Not on what someone else wanted her to be but on who she had discovered herself to become. And that was worth more than any ring, real or fake, could ever represent. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that your worst moment does not have to be your final chapter, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of transformation and triumph. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that rebuilding is possible. And drop a comment telling me what is one thing you have built from your own wreckage. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Remember this. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from our greatest losses. Sometimes the people who try to break us accidentally show us how strong we really are. And sometimes, the best revenge is not destruction. It is construction. Vivian learned that the hard way. But she learned it well. And so can you. This has been Mr. Lawson. Thank you for being part of this journey. I will see you in the next story.